5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
You're listening to Working Forward, presented by Symetra. In this limited podcast series, hosted by Todd Zen, we explore the future of work from a variety of viewpoints and discuss the challenges and opportunities ahead.
Hello and welcome to the Working Forward podcast. My name is Todd Zen and I am your host. We are so glad you've joined us today for what I think is going to be an excellent and extremely topical episode where we are going to be discussing artificial intelligence and specifically AI's impact on the financial services industry. I don't think you can go very far without some conversation or so seeing some article about artificial intelligence. I think AI is on everybody's mind in no short part because of the massive transformative potential, the transformation that's already occurring, and also the nascent opportunity for significant future transformation. But I think also in this conversation, we'll touch on the fact that it's not perfect. There are pitfalls. There could be ethical challenges. There's regulatory issues. There is a lot to be worked out here, but the potential is, of course, enormous. So very excited to bat this around a little bit with a guest that I think is the perfect person to talk to. I am thrilled that Jason Ash is joining us. Jason is a member of the Symetra team. He is Symetra's Senior Vice President, Chief of Data. So Jason, hello and welcome to the show.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's dive right in. Let me hit you with a really big, broad question, and then maybe we'll narrow things as we go a little bit. But, you know, from where you sit, Chief of Data at Symetra, and certainly seeing AI impacting things quite a bit, well, what are you seeing, and this can be from a Symetra perspective or maybe just more broadly, because I know you're looking at things broadly as well, but, you know, what are some of the early things we're seeing as far as the role that AI is playing in the workplace and just maybe broadly how it's transforming certain types of industries?
Sure. I would say some of the biggest impacts that we're seeing today at Symetra revolves around individual and team level productivity. So hopefully most of the people that are watching this are familiar with ChatGPT and have used it for things like writing emails or maybe help summarizing documents. Maybe you have like a long legal document that you want to understand a little bit better, or an industry standard that you want to understand. You can maybe ask a large language model for help. So I think there's a lot of immediate applications for individual productivity, things like that. That individual productivity, you know, what we see is that it typically grows and becomes sort of team level or department level productivity. There are ways where individuals can build models that other people on their teams can use. So you can share prompts, you can have shared models. And so in this way, you can take kind of the best insights that people are generating as individuals and standardize them in some way and then share them across teams. So I think this is how we're going to build this foundation of like individual insights that become, you know, team, more structured, regularly used things to then more production-like things. For example, embedding AI in the application process to speed up the way that we process things. And so in this way, I think you're just going to keep seeing more and more structure added into the process and more ways that AI can contribute.
That's exciting stuff. And absolutely, I've started to see some of those things happening at Symetra. And I love what you said about summarizing a legal document as well. One of the things that I do and my team does quite a bit of is look at policy filings. This is not fun work. It's arduous work. And, you know, having a tool like ChatGPT or probably any large language model is really transformative, not to overuse the word. You know, something that would take hours and hours to do and get insights from these insights can be gleaned in mere moments. So it really is an exciting tool and opportunity. So let's dig a little further in the financial services industry. So at Symetra, the audience will know I come from our benefits division, but we have two other major lines of business as well that we offer. We are in the retirement business, selling annuities and retirement products, individual life insurance, so various types of life insurance there. So we do a lot and different things. But so maybe speaking broadly from a financial services standpoint, what are your thoughts? What have you seen so far at Symetra? You referenced one already in your answer, but I'm sure you have more examples of operations. How can AI be used to streamline various operations? We process an enormous number of transactions. So,
Mhm.
what do you think about AI's potential in helping us navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, it can be complex because financial services is obviously a very highly regulated industry for good reason. When you're dealing with people's money, especially at the times when insurance needs to be kicking in, you have a tremendous amount of responsibility to your policyholders, your stakeholders, your beneficiaries. And so you have to be especially careful with how you think about embedding automation of any kind. So typically, what we see in the industry is that AI applications within insurance tend to be pretty far away from customers. You're very unlikely to see an AI model that's going to, walk you through the claims process. That's a time when human touch is especially important. It's a time when mistakes are like absolutely unforgivable. You just can't make mistakes. So what we tend to see is that the types of AI applications that we're exploring initially, and I think we're similar to many other companies in this regard, tend to be very much behind the scenes. They also tend to be almost exclusively human in the loop, meaning that a process is never entirely driven by AI, but it might be AI assisted. So an example that I can think of that I think has a lot of application is how we process new business. So if you submit an application for one of our policies, those applications need to meet several criteria. For example, the document that you send to us needs to be signed. It needs to have a date attached to it. It might need to have your agent's ID or their national producer number. So there's a long list of things that are required for a document to be what we call in good order. Humans today check a lot of those things, but there's an opportunity for AI to step in and automate a lot of that. So, for example, it's entirely possible for us to use AI to determine whether a document is signed. So what you can do is imagine that instead of having a person look at a document, kind of go scan for the signature and then check a box that it's signed, you might have AI do that preliminary review. And then it might be easier for a human to come in and just verify. So that's like a small amount of time savings, but if you're processing, lots and lots of applications, it can add up. And if you think about all of the different checks that we want to do, you sort of reach this economy of scale of having these sort of little AI processes embedded that at scale sort of start to save you meaningful amounts of time. So that's one example that I share just to illustrate that there's a lot of opportunity to do sort of very targeted, specific things with AI with a human in the loop that are far away from the customer. And that's how we can sort of dip our toes in, capture some of the benefits of AI, but minimize to a great extent any of the risks that we might see with AI.
That's it's really a very interesting answer, and it actually ties to the next question I want to ask. But I can see based on how you frame that you're thinking a lot about this because the thing that I wanted to ask you next was about customer experience, and it
Mhm.
definitely is something where AI has great potential to enhance all sorts of things, but I worry a lot about leaning on it too much to be customer facing and creating clunky outcomes. I've the last couple episodes, I feel like I've had reason to bring up chatbots that everybody is frustrated by and generally dislikes. And so, I guess I'm wondering because you referenced that fact that, maybe AI can exist behind the scenes in a way that helps streamline things that helps customers, but maybe not be right in front of the customer in ways that might frustrate the customer. So you may have already answered the question, but I'm wondering, as you think about AI and you think about customer experience, is there other ways, even if it was more direct customer facing, or do you think it's too early? Is it something where the AI will improve and maybe get better at direct customer consumer interactions? Any thoughts on, and I guess maybe even more context, right? Like we absolutely want to delight our customers. We don't want to frustrate them. So what are your thoughts on AI's role there potentially?
It's a good question. Um, I think the first question you want to ask, and you hinted at this, is like, what is the experience that you want to create for your customers? I wouldn't start by saying, how can I use AI? That would be sort of the secondary question. Think about the claims process, for example. If you're in the life insurance space, a customer is calling you when one of their loved ones has died. You need to handle that in a way that is meaningful, personal, for a person. And AI is probably not what you want in that. On the other hand, if you have, a pretty arduous, confusing application process where there's a lot of information required, the strategic use of AI to maybe like offer to gather information automatically might be a really big improvement to the customer experience. So I think you really want to think about, first and foremost, what's the experience that you're looking to create for your customers? Where is it important to have a personal touch? Where is it, a huge convenience to have an automation or a component of automation embedded? And that automation could be AI related, it could be machine learning related. It could just be a convenience of like going to fetch some data from a publicly available source so that a person doesn't have to type it in. Those are all of the tools at your disposal when you're trying to craft the customer experience. And so we think about all of those and try to match the right one to what we're trying to do.
That makes a lot of sense. Start with the customer, start with the experience you want to design, and if AI can play a role in supporting that, then great. But you don't start by saying, "How can I use AI to design a great customer experience?" I think that's really great framing. So on to the next topic, something you actually referenced earlier. It's completely correct. We are in a highly regulated industry. Regulations are many, they're vast. So curious for your thoughts on the regulatory environment surrounding AI, specific to the financial services industry as well. I've certainly seen some things from various states and the businesses that I operate in where the certain regulators are raising concerns. But what's your general take on the regulatory environment for AI, and what do we need to think about as a financial services company?
There's a lot of regulation. I've spent the last couple of years trying to adapt our internal AI programs to be compliant with the regulation that exists. And there are lots of sources for this regulation. So we're, financial services companies. We're subject to a lot of the insurance specific regulation. For example, the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Carriers, put out a bulletin earlier this year advising state departments of insurance on how they might individually regulate AI. And so we're seeing many, many states now adopt this NAIC framework. So we as a company have to make sure that we're in compliance with the standards put out by the NAIC. On the other hand, you have really interesting situations where states and even maybe federal regulations are something that we have to pay attention to as well. So Colorado, early last year in 2024, passed a law at the state level that governed the way that companies use consumer data. So they called it the standard 10-1-1, governing the use of external consumer data and information sources. Now, this does affect us because we do business in Colorado and we work with a lot of personal information, but it goes beyond insurance. This was a law that was passed at the state level. So then the Colorado Department of Insurance had to figure out, what does this mean for enforcement for insurance companies? So you have all of these different perspectives and regulatory bodies that are, trying to move the regulatory landscape forward. And we as a company are building programs internally to address, I would say, the core regulatory issues that relate to AI, as well as the specific requirements for each of those standards. One that I find really interesting is a proposal to amend the Colorado rule to start doing more bias testing on machine learning and AI models. So the goal there is to make sure that if you are using some sort of automation like machine learning or AI to make decisions on behalf of customers, they want some assurance that we wouldn't have made a fundamentally different decision if a human by themselves had made the decision. And furthermore, they want to know that decisions between different groups aren't materially different where they shouldn't be. So those are the types of things that we see in the regulatory space that try to make sure we're being responsible with customers' data, especially if it comes to how we're making a decision with it.
Yeah, those are great examples. One thing that I saw very specific about this, and it may have been limited to the group benefit space, although it could also have individual life insurance elements as well. But there was some states that asked for some very specific information and disclosure around: are you using AI in claim determination in any way?
Mm-hmm.
And the request for information was broad in the sense that we really had to take a step back and say, well, in any way, we're certainly not broadly using AI to process claims and make full, determinations. But in some cases, and you mentioned this earlier, like gathering the information or, presenting it in some way in some framework that's helping and, things like that. So, clearly, and this wasn't a regulation, this was more of like a pre-regulation, but it was definitely something where you could see where their heads were going, right? And I also think what you mentioned about Colorado makes a lot of sense as well, because if we are using AI in some sense to do any claim determination, which we aren't today, but I think like everybody else, we're thinking about it, it gets to that question of bias. What is the bias, and making sure that you're stamping that out. So, very interesting times. I think this is definitely something that's going to continue to evolve, and we obviously have to think about it a lot as we integrate AI into all sorts of elements. So, speaking of AI and potential, and as we continue the dialogue here, I want to talk about something that, I guess this one's selfish, but my role in the benefits division is building products. So I am our head of product, and we operate portfolios of life insurance, disability, critical illness, supplemental health, all sorts of things. And one of the things that I've seen a lot of potential in, and I referenced it earlier with the policy documents and things that we look at. One of the things we spend a lot of time doing is looking across the industry to see what others are doing, and looking at ourselves as well, and doing competitive analysis and things like that. So it seems to me, just in the early days, we've been able to get a lot of use around helping AI inform our product development roadmap, identify maybe gaps in our products and things we can do better. But I also sort of think I might just be scratching the surface. Do you have any thoughts on maybe how AI could be even more significant in how we develop products and how we can innovate?
I do. I have some thoughts. I spend most of my time building technology. So I write a lot of code, for example. So I'm going to start there, and I will try my best to get back to your question. A lot of what I'm trying to do when I'm writing code is not to just like produce a bunch of code. That's not the goal. Usually the goal is to try to like think deeply about a problem and like build a mental model of it, and then express that mental model through code. When I am doing that, I often use AI to kind of like compare and contrast different approaches that I have in my head, to validate assumptions that I'm making. But ultimately, like the thing that I'm trying to do is to like solidify my own understanding. I'm not trying to produce a bunch of code. If I were trying to produce a bunch of code, then I would use AI in a very different way. And I would say, AI, please write me a bunch of code. There's an analogy that I've heard before that I really liked, which is like, if you think about somebody going to the gym to exercise, they're not there like literally to lift up and put down as much weight as possible. If they were, they would just sort of bring a forklift, and they would just lift up the weight, put it back down a bunch of times. And so if AI is the forklift there, like that's not a good use. That's not like actually solving the problem that you're trying to solve. You're going to the gym so that you can like improve your body, and so you do that yourself. So when I think about product development, I think there are certain aspects that AI can assist with, but I think about that fundamentally as like the competitive advantage that we're trying to build. We need to have a shared understanding of the purpose that we are after, like what experience we're trying to drive for our customers. I think AI can inform a lot of the inputs to that process, but where I don't see AI playing a huge role is like building products from scratch for us, or really kind of taking away the creativity of that, and the ownership that people have over that process. So those are some of the ways where I think AI like could be used strategically, like you said, to gather information about the competitive landscape. Like create a table for me of the different types of products that exist out there and the features they have. That's a great use of AI. But then I think there's no substitute for like getting a bunch of people in a room and talking about like where Symetra wants to be in the industry and how we're going to differentiate ourselves. Um, so that I think won't go away for quite a while.
That's a very helpful answer. In my head, I was wondering if I could just type in build a great critical illness product and see if it could just sort of spit it out and I could run with it. But it's also good to know that good old fashioned human collaboration can't be replaced in this way, likely won't be replaced in this way. But also having a powerful tool that can say, provide a market scan of, the top 10 critical illness products based on annual sales and they can sort of collate all that information and provide a report to me and my team. That's enormously powerful and a great use, I think, of AI. So on the next question, one of the things that I know at Symetra we're trying to do, I think a lot of organizations are trying to do it, regardless of their industry and what they're looking to accomplish, is to make more and better data-driven decisions. So how can we, instead of, we're always trying to make decision making is central to anything you do and anything you're trying to accomplish. And I think everybody can agree that data, at least good data, relevant data, is enormously helpful in the decision making process. But I'm curious for your thoughts on, how AI can advance those goals. How can you make better data-driven decisions? And my guess is there may be some pitfalls here too, because data is a tool, but it's also could be misapplied or misinterpreted or things like that. And maybe AI can play a role there in helping, or maybe not. But just curious, kind of on this big topic of endeavoring to make more and better data-driven decisions. What are your thoughts on AI? And obviously you're chief of data, so maybe even outside of AI, what are your thoughts around this idea of how to best use data for great decision making?
Yeah, I mean, you set up the thing that I talk about all the time, which is like AI requires good data. If you have an AI model layered on top of bad data, it's going to be a bad AI model, or it's going to give you bad results. So most of the work that I think contributes to like the good use of AI at this company is actually just good, solid data work. It means kind of collecting and cleaning data from all over the company so that it can be used kind of joined together and surface insights. AI might allow you to kind of surface some of those insights a little bit faster. So for example, if you have this like nice, rich, clean data set and you feed it into an AI model as a very first step and say, hey, like point out some insights here, yeah, it might be useful. But fundamentally, most of the work that went into that was good old-fashioned data work. So we have really robust data infrastructure with our data warehouse that gathers data periodically throughout the day from all of our key systems. It's organized, it's collected, it's documented. We have a data catalog that shows how all the data is related, sort of how models were built from other sources of data, over and over through this data lineage. And I think that is the most important ingredient to starting to make better data-driven decisions. AI, might be a component of that sort of downstream, but it all starts with having that clean data. Now that's sort of more of the technical side. The other side of making good data-driven decisions is having the data literacy and culture at your company. So how do you, what are your norms at the company for how do you make decisions? Do you always seek full consensus? Do you, try to establish metrics that you're going to judge your decisions by? Do you set goals ahead of time, or do you sort of retrofit goals once you already have made the decision and then just try to find data that agrees with what you wanted to do anyway? A lot of that is like your cultural norms around making decisions. AI, I don't think will have much of a role to play there. I think with building any type of culture, it's an intentional, purposeful effort by a group of people. So I think that's very important to keep in mind. Like Having good data is an important ingredient for decisions. Having a data-driven culture is an important ingredient for making data-driven decisions. AI might contribute around the margins, but I don't see it replacing at any level either of those two things.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, and definitely appreciate the insights there. So I've got three more questions for you. Two are very
Okay.
future focused, right? We are the Working Forward podcast. I want to talk to you about the future and where you see this going. But before I get to those two questions, I want to ask you a question about today. And that question is this. I think in our discussion and the theme of your answers, what I've picked up on is that there are certain things that it seems like AI is pretty good at in its current state, and there's definitely some things that maybe it is not the most effective tool to utilize, right? So I guess I'm just interested in your take, and you've given a ton of examples, but it hit me to ask you the broad question. Like, in your opinion, what are some of the strongest use cases for AI, and what are some of the things where you think, nope, you know what? That's more of a human thing. That's more like, something where AI is not great at, right? And maybe even that's in the second part of the answer. I'm interested in your take on some of the mistakes we're seeing in AI. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about, using AI for certain things and getting sort of strange answers, right? And maybe that's about the
Mhm.
data set and kind of like you just said, like where that's pulling for. But just maybe to get back to my point, I'd love to hear, what do you think AI is great at? What's an awesome use case for it? And where maybe do you see some of the weaknesses or challenges today?
Sure. So there's definitely a few elements of what you asked. Let me start with like my sort of personal heuristic for when to use AI. This is just my kind of rules of thumb for thinking about when and to what extent I use AI for the thing that I'm doing. I definitely think about it like my forklift example. If I'm going to the gym, I want to lift the weights myself. So if I'm trying to build my understanding of something, I don't want to offload that to an AI. So I would say don't use AI for that. If you're seeking like personal understanding, use AI as a tool, but like don't lose sight of the thing that you're trying to achieve, which is your own personal understanding. Um, I think about like the risk of what I'm doing. So if I'm writing an internal email to a colleague to give them a quick status update, I very frequently will pull up something like ChatGPT and I will dictate into ChatGPT for 30 seconds or a minute, and I will have ChatGPT write the email and I will quickly scan it and then very often just send it. The stakes are very low. So when the stakes are low and it's just trying to kind of communicate information, maybe that's a great time to use AI to just help you do things a little bit faster than you could otherwise. On the other hand, if I'm trying to think through like, what is our AI strategy for the company and how does it work with our data strategy? How do they complement one another? And what are our goals for this year? That's more of an activity that like I really need to drive. And I might consult an AI model for, industry standards. I might ask for reference material. I might use something like deep research from OpenAI to have it produce a very detailed, like rich summary that I can draw from. But I fundamentally view that as an activity that like is important for me to drive. The way that I think about this also is that when you think about what the AI is doing, it's drawing from all of the data across the internet to give you the most likely response to the question that you've asked. When I'm building our data and AI strategy for Symetra, I don't want our strategy to be the most likely thing that the internet has said about building a data strategy. I want it to be a purposeful, thoughtful, Symetra-specific approach that takes what I know and sort of puts it into action here. I don't want sort of the medium answer. So those are some of the ways that I think about when you might use AI, like for what purpose. There's another really specific example that I've been enjoying lately, which is, again, I write a lot of code, and I think the idea of LLMs as agents is extremely powerful. So I'll give an example of what that means. When you say that an LLM is an agent, it has an access to a very small amount of powerful tools to be able to sort of interact with the world. If you're on a computer, You might have the AI be able to interact with your file system to be able to see what files are there. If I'm writing code, I can even go one step further and I can have it read the source code for all the documents that I'm working with. And even that little bit of like extra interactivity, that ability to call a tool, makes the AI models significantly more relevant and powerful for what you're trying to do. So it's little things like that where the right application of AI has just set it forward by leaps and bounds. And as a tool for writing code, that's an extremely important advancement. I'll close my answer to this question by saying I still think AI is extremely underestimated. Like I'm giving you a few examples of ways that I use it. There are probably people out there that are using it in ways that I wouldn't have imagined and that are extremely powerful. I still think we just don't quite understand exactly the impact that it's going to have and like how it could be used. And I constantly find myself trying to embed it into new things in ways that I didn't try before, just because maybe something will work. So that would be my advice to everybody listening is don't feel like there are like good uses of AI and bad uses of AI. Just try it. It's very low cost, very easy, low stakes. You might learn something.
Well, that I think is a very thoughtful answer, and I appreciate you sharing your thinking. I think that that's very compelling, and a very good way of thinking about it. And it actually segues fantastically into my final two questions for you. So, thinking about the future, and again, the theme of our podcast, I'm interested in your thoughts on whether you want to say 5 years out or 10 years out. What are some predictions you have for the future of the workplace, the future of AI's impact on it? From your last answer, I get the sense that in some ways I think we're just scratching the surface, which is exciting, but change is scary for people as well. I think with every article I read expressing excitement, there's a corresponding negative article about how AI is coming for the jobs, or something like, oh, humans won't have a role or things like that, which to me feels very overblown and not accurate, right? But what are your thoughts on maybe move the clock ahead 5 years? What do you see as once maybe we're better at harnessing the power of this new enormous tool? What do you see the role of AI in the workplace being in the future?
It's such a hard question to answer. I get asked this a lot, and I never feel like I'm qualified to answer it. But I like to maybe try to put it into perspective. So AI as a field is not new. But if you look at ChatGPT as sort of a big fundamental shift, that was November 2022. So we've only had it for a couple of years at this point, and it feels like it has been just a massive, massive shift. And if you look at, I remember playing around with ChatGPT the day it was launched. It wasn't very good. It was fun to play with, and it could like write you a poem, but it wasn't very good. Today, it plays a huge role in a lot of the stuff that I do. I use it as a pair programmer. I use it, to help me like write summaries. I use it in like pretty fundamental ways, and that only took a couple of years. So if I extrapolate that to 5 years, we're very much on an exponential curve. You'd have to imagine that things will be significantly better by then. Humans are notoriously bad at predicting the future of things that are exponential. So I'm going to caveat all of my answers with that. But I will say some of the things that I'm really excited for are the ability for like lots more code to be written. I think the world will benefit significantly from much more software. Just think about industries that could be automated, experiences that could be better. Much more software is the way to do that. Obviously, it needs to be high quality software. It needs to be, understood. There's a risk that as the amount of software in the world just explodes by amount, we maintain just quite a minimal understanding of it. And that's a pretty scary thing. Other things that I worry about when it comes to AI are just how we're going to deal with it with processes that are not ready for it. You think about, there are some AI companies out there today that will help you like automatically file claims, or they might automatically help you to submit a malpractice suit against a doctor. The scale that we're used to dealing with those things is very, very small compared to the scale that we would need to have to accommodate like an AI explosion of claims filings or malpractice filings, even lawsuits, things like that. So I worry a little bit about whether our current infrastructure can handle what could be an explosion of like AI-driven output in some of these areas. So those are some of the things that I think about. On the other hand, you have the optimistic side, which is that think about all of the amazing opportunities for automation and improving experiences that could be driven by AI. And so, it could be that we have offsetting impacts, but it's just extremely hard to predict. And those are some of the thoughts that I have about it. I don't know that I'm bold enough to make specific predictions for 5 years from now, though.
Well, I thank you for being a good sport. I'm sure you get that question all the time, and I think your insights are valuable. And you're absolutely right about humans being bad at making, predicting the future with something so limitless and something so transformative. But I think just even hearing how you're thinking about it is super helpful to me and helpful to our audience. And I think it dovetails perfectly into the last question I have for you. And I think this one should be maybe a little bit more specific and actually pretty relevant to what the great work you're doing here at Symetra. Our audience is comprised of a lot of people that work in the benefits business, and they think about employee benefits very specifically, but there are also companies. Companies buy employee benefits. Our benefit brokers help companies buy employee benefits and help companies plan for the future. So, what I think would be really interesting for our audience is, how do you see how can organizations prepare for this level of change when, as you just articulated extremely well, we can't even predict exactly what that change will be. But just from a general standpoint, right? What do you think about it? I think you touched on this a lot already in some of your answers. So maybe I guess I'm just asking you to summarize. But how can a company plan for, to the best of their ability, or be prepared to adapt to the sort of changes that are likely to come from this type of technology?
I'm going to give an aggressive response to this. I'm going to suggest that we are not doing enough to take advantage of AI. I use AI daily, all the time, and I think I'm not using it enough. I heard a quote the other day that AI is electricity. If you imagine that you were running a company, back before electricity, and then electricity becomes available, and you're like, oh, like that's really nice. Like electricity was invented. Like that's kind of cool. Like how should we use electricity? Like maybe I'll probably try to pay attention to it. You would have been left behind. I think there's a lot of truth to that. AI is electricity. If you are not aggressively thinking about how AI will be a part of your company's strategy, will be a part of how you are performing your individual job, I think you're not doing enough. So I think it's very important. Just I don't want this to seem daunting. It's not like you have to become an AI expert overnight. But for example, if you have never used ChatGPT, you need to use ChatGPT. Just try it. If you use it maybe once a month, you should probably try to use it once a week. If you use it once a week, you should be using it daily. Those are sort of very easy steps just to build this personal familiarity with what's happening. Another reason why I think this is important is that I mentioned before, AI is advancing exponentially. I've used the analogy that it's kind of like saving for retirement. The earlier you start saving for retirement, you sort of benefit from compound interest as you go, and you have your money working for you. You're benefiting from time in the market. On the other hand, if you don't save for retirement and you wait, you've got this massive shortfall that is incredibly difficult to come back from. I view an investment in AI as something similar. If you are familiar with ChatGPT, if you're sort of like keeping pace with it, you're going to benefit from the industry advancements in AI, and you'll be familiar and you can kind of keep up. If you are sort of taking a step back and like waiting to see what happens, then I think the industry will rapidly outpace you and it will be extremely hard to catch up. So for all of those reasons, I think it's extremely important to build an individual familiarity with AI first. Think just using chatbots and kind of seeing what they could do to help you with your day-to-day. And then secondly, if you're a manager, if you're an exec of a company, if AI is not a fundamental part of how you're thinking about advancing the goals of your company, I think you should rethink that. You should really be thinking deeply about how AI will move your business forward. So for all of those reasons, I think there's just a lot of opportunity, and it's important that we pay attention to it.
That's a fantastic answer. A great note to end on. Very quickly, maybe before we end, one thing I've been doing is because I agree with you. I think it's about exposure. I think it's about using. I think sometimes people are intimidated. They don't know where to start, so they just don't start. And one thing I started doing was my go-to over the last 15 years when I'm trying to figure something out is to access the internet. Use a search bar in the internet. I think pretty much all of us do this. I've started just doing that in ChatGPT, and I find the quality of the responses and the information I get is better, and it becomes a jumping off point for me to investigate further. And just by starting that one very, very small step, kind of pivoting to using ChatGPT for just general inquiries has led to me using it significantly more. Thinking, boy, I have this problem. I think ChatGPT was the person to ask. Sorry, it's not a person. But it's really changed my personal framing of it, and I think it really speaks to the spirit of what you're saying, which is jump in. The water's warm, and also if you don't, it's going to leave you behind. So engage sooner rather than later. So with that, let me close things out. Jason, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your insights. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience did as well. And feeling very good about Symetra and being in good hands as we wade into this unknown future, but very exciting future. So with that, I will close the episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you have not already subscribed, I encourage you to do so. We will be coming back with more episodes soon, and I look forward to speaking with you then. Thank you.
You're listening to Working Forward, Future of Work podcast series. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Symetra Life Insurance Company or its affiliates.